Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Francesca Di Palma, and I'm responsible of the division of final demand, labor and capital input, and environmental accounts in national accounts. And I'll introduce this second section, a brief outline of the topics that I will present today. The first slide has the purpose to present the current state of art of environmental accounts in Italian national accounts. Then I will move to the approach to monetary values in the non-standard part of the SEEA ecosystem accounting. And finally, in the last part of the presentation, the last two slides, I will introduce the session's topics. That is to say, the approach to the diverse economic values of the ecosystem services, or more better saying, connected to ecosystems. So, accounting for nature in national accounts. Yesterday we talked about ecosystems, stance and conditions, so we can now put aside it to present what we measure in Italy's national accounts to describe the relationships between economy and environment. Here is a schematic frame of the interactions between economy and nature. The economy take raw materials from nature. It processes to produce goods and then release residual waste and byproduct in the nature. This happen not only at the level of national economy, but also with the rest of the world's economy through import and exports of raw materials, produced goods, and waste. Here. In Italy, we produce, to measure these relationships, 3 physical flow accounts and 4 environmental monetary accounts. The 3 physical flow accounts are material flow accounts, physical energy flow accounts, and their emission. They measure the pressure of human activities on the natural environment. While the monetary accounts that we produce, goods and service sector accounts, protection expenditure, taxes by economic activity, and the new one, the subsidies and similar transfer. They measure the response, the actions put by the socio-economic system to reduce the pressure on the natural on the nature. This is what we produce and publish annually in Istat. But more has yet to come. In fact, in few years, European national accounts will be produced under the new manual, the ISA 2030, that is eager to be approved. But it follows strictly the SNI 2025 approved last year. Both manuals in their drafting put a lot of interest in natural resources. In fact, while natural resources asset were treated as economic asset and valued as any other fixed capital asset in the national accounts. In the new manuals, there's the new manuals highlights the natural resource by creating a new category that is produced natural resource and non-produced natural resource that enlarge also the scope of the data to be collected. In fact, many of the data, the values that were produced only on the voluntary basis in the previous manuals now are compulsory. And in addition, we have a new natural resource really important, the renewable resources that is considered for the first time in the national accounts. All these new requests pose a big challenge on national accountants as the new assets need a complete new methodology or procedure to be estimated, and because it can't be, they can't be estimated with the typical methodology used for fixed capital assets. Okay. Sorry for the other technical inconvenience. The most significant change in the new manuals is the inclusion of mandatory as mandatory of depletion in national accounts considered as cost of production that is included to account for the fact that economic growth occurs at the price of natural resource degradations, and that this can impact on future economic growth. You saw this slide yesterday when Alessandra presented the ecosystem extent and condition and services. Now I use it to introduce the non-standard part of this SEEA ecosystem accounting, and namely monetary ecosystem services and ecosystem asset accounts. The chapters 8-11 that comprise these following these accounts are not yet included in European Union accounts, and the complexity of their evaluation has prompted the UNSG to mandate the resolution of outstanding methodological issues related to the complex valuation of ecosystem services and ecosystem resources. To partly contribute to this effort, ISTAT has focuses on studying the range of values associated to ecosystem services, fostering a lively international debate that has led to several interesting proposals, many of which will be presented later in this session. Well, the international standard part of the CEA ecosystem accounting is a well-recognized extent accounting system concerning ecosystem extents, conditions, and service modules. But it has a limitation of excluding monetary values from the international statistical standard. An extended accounting system for ecosystem and their service in monetary terms is the one described in chapters 8-11. Indeed, while there was a broad consensus about the definitional and conceptual framework measuring indicators that represent the flows of ecosystem services between the supply ecosystems and the economy, there was a consensus about the role and treatment of economic values. The debate is about whether to use monetary values as an extension of the accounts or to promote thematic accounts which use the same concepts as the one applied in the integrated framework of national accounts, but highlighting this particular aspect of the economy. Chapter 8-11 did not make it to the international standard, also because it requires extends the production boundary to encompass ecosystem services, giving them the power to generate not just biophysical services, but directly exchange value. A common thread running through the alternative proposal born with the debate is the concern over the extension of the production boundary and the pricing approach. In this debate, the concept of connected to suggests solutions based on a multiple connected values approach, with the idea of developing the monetary part of ecosystem accounts as a thematic accounts rather than an extension of the production boundary. Why the idea of thematic accounts? Because the values connected to ecosystems can be found in different accounts of system national accounts, output of economic activities, distributive transaction, taxes, expenditure, financial flows, and so on, and can be also part of a larger aggregate. For instance, part of consumer expenditure as travel and stay while nature can be enjoyed. This session will tackle the measurement of the economic economic importance of ecosystem and cost of inaction over the ecosystem, with particular attention to multiple values and non-pricing perspective. The purpose to explore and clarify this concept and possible answer to some questions. How to classify the monetary values and link them to policy uses, or which monetary values have to be calculated, or how to interpret the dynamic of specific monetary values, and so on. So, I finish. I thank you very much, not only for listening, but also to be here to participate to the debate and the broader program of these days. I don't know if the first speaker is... Okay, so, okay, just a moment. So, I just want to say, to recall that you have 20 minutes for your presentation, and that after the presentation is possible to pose only brief questions on clarification, but the discussion will be later into different slot of time. And yes, welcome to Eric Gomez.
Yes, thank you. You can share your slides now.
Okay, so,
And
welcome, Eric. Eric will present the plural valuation of nature in official statistics and ecosystem accounting.
Thank you very much. Can you see my my slides? Hello?
yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesca, for the introduction. Thank you, Aldo, for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. I've gave the title of Beyond Commensuration, Plural Valuation of Nature in Official Statistics and Ecosystem Accounting. And I intend to create a sort of dialogue between the field in which, for instance, ecological economists like myself are working around the values and valuation of nature, and the work that statisticians are doing with environmental accounting. And some of you might be familiar with IPBS, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And a few years back, we published a report called the Global Values Assessment that stated quite clearly that the causes of global nature crisis are linked to the way we value nature in political and economic decisions. And as many in the audience might be familiar with, this, of course, has to do with, to a large extent, to the way we account. We do our accounting of our wealth, because we have developed accounting systems that register very systematically the positive side of the production process, so how we provide goods and services to provide for our needs, but that neglect many of the so-called hidden costs of economic growth and development. No? So growth, as most of you will know, bear many unaccounted costs in terms of pollution, resource depletion, biodiversity loss, and so on, that rarely appear in economic accounts unless they are claimed through court cases or unless state regulations mandate their internalization. No? But in practice, most of these costs are borne by third parties and are often shifted towards future generations, vulnerable communities, other species, and so on. So there's been a long-standing debate on how to tackle this problem. And one approach that has been very popular for some time is what some authors have referred to as the new environmental pragmatism, that makes the case for the broader use of market language, market values, and market instruments in environmental policy, including also in environmental accounting. This is a classical example about externalities, about hidden values and costs. This is cost-benefit analysis of a mangrove forest being converted into a shrimp farm. This is what conventional cost-benefit analysis will tell us. The mangrove forests give little economic value, just a few timbered and non-timbered products. But if we convert it, if we destroy the forest and we convert it into a shrimp farm, we will get high economic value per hectare. So the kind of signal that comes to decision makers is go ahead, because this involves more benefits than costs. But if we take into consideration all these hidden costs, all these hidden non-accounted values of ecosystem services in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, coastal protection, and so on, we would see already the benefits of the mangrove forest outweighing the benefits of the shrimp farm. And if we also take into account the unaccounted costs of the shrimp farm in terms of remediation of pollution, restored ecosystems, the subsidies, and so on, we can end up with net negative values. No? So this is just one way of showing how radically different our accounting looks like and our decisions based on that accounting looks like, whether or not we take into account the non-market values of nature, the values that are often embedded in ecosystem services. So basically, ecosystem services assessments worldwide show us that we have a skewed accounting system and valuation system, whereas the market promotes the production of those services having an explicit economic value, so-called provisioning services, at the expense of all other types of ecosystem services, so cultural values, ecosystem values, and so on, that do not have explicit economic values and that very often escape national statistics and so on. So the kind of message that has been emerging from these type of studies for decision makers is that ecosystems and biodiversity are being neglected in decision making because they are not explicitly valued and accounted for, which ultimately results in the loss of ecosystems and biodiversity. Within this kind of new environmental pragmatist approach, the focus has been very strongly on monetary values. No, many of you might be familiar with this framework, the total economic value framework, that basically tries to take into account all these non-market values of ecosystem services, and then through shadow prices and indirect monetary valuation approaches that very often involve the recreation of hypothetical markets. You translate all these values into monetary values, and you aggregate all those values in the so-called total economic value, which would be the kind of column that added up to the total monetary value that I showed you in the previous slide with the mangroves and so on. So there is, of course, a rationale for the use of this. Is the kind of valuation system. The focus on money is the valuation system that better fits into existing decision-making frameworks based on cost-benefit analysis and so on. This has also been kind of scaled up to regional or global scale. You might be familiar with studies like the Stern report or the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity that basically produce these kind of exercises at global scales, showing the unaccounted costs of inaction in front of problems like climate change or biodiversity loss, showing how much is the kind of hidden costs in GDP, for instance. But this has created big discussion in the valuation community and ecological economics community about which kind of values should be accounted for and which are the values that come to the front or are neglected in decision-making processes. No, one quick key question here that economists have been asking for centuries is where does value emerge from? No, the old physiocrats said it came from land or from nature. Marx, Ricardo, and others made the case that all value emerges from labor through the labor theory of value. Neoclassical economists assume that it emerges from utility. There has been also attempts to create energy theories of value. And although all these theories pertain to very different ontological and ideological perspectives, they all have one thing in common, which is that they are dominated by a notion of value monism, the idea that we can reduce all values to one single measurement rod. No? Well, this is an idea that has been problematized strongly for a very long time, but maybe the field that has kind of developed this in most extent is the field of ecological economics, around the idea that nature actually holds multiple values that can be uncommensurable. What do we mean by uncommensurable? It basically means that we have distinct values. We have ecological values, cultural values, aesthetic values, spiritual values, and we might not be able to reduce those values in a meaningful way to one single measurement rod. No, if we accept this pre-analytical assumption of incommensurability, the practical corollary is that we have to accept there is a plurality of values in nature. that have different valuation measures, and that there is weak comparability of values. No? So there are limits to the extent you can reduce those values to single measures. Okay, to illustrate this with a sort of a little bit of a joke, but I think it sends the message. If we to illustrate a little bit the limits of aggregation of different sources of information, if we settle in a new town, we may want to collect a number of information. So how many people live in this area, what is the level above the sea, when it was established, and so on. All these values, all these informations have a value in themselves. But if we aggregate those informations into something called total information value of this town, you end up with a number that possibly doesn't make any sense. No? Well, I'm provoking you a little bit, but to some extent it's the same criticism that ecological economists have directed to the total economic value approach, which basically pushes maybe too much the limits of aggregation. No? In the end, monetizing things that maybe do not render themselves well to monetization, things like aesthetic values, place values, spiritual values, and so on, where maybe the monetary measurement rod do not pertain or do not capture these values in a meaningful way. So sometimes it can be better, rather than try to compress everything to one single metric, to keep it disaggregated in a folder of different ecosystem accounts. No? The response, the sort of logical response, if we accept that there is incommensurability across different values in nature, is the notion of plural valuation of nature. No? An idea that has also been referred to in the literature as inclusive or integrated valuation of nature. And quite some time back, when we were pushing the discussion, we came with a tentative definition that I think it has resisted scrutiny over the years, as the process of synthesizing information, knowledge, and data to elicit the various ways in which people appraises nature's values, how we attribute meaning and importance to nature. It is expected to facilitate accounting and valuation frames that give basis for informed deliberation, decision-making, and planning. It has been taken up by a growing body of literature over the past 10 years, but also it has been endorsed by IPBES, which is signed by some 150 governments worldwide. So right now it's a sort of strongly institutionalized also in the science policy arena. Nonetheless, there is an obvious tension between plural valuation of nature and traditional accounting and official statistics, and they are not easy to integrate, right? Because official statistics traditionally rely on standardization, comparability, aggregation, and quantification, and environmental accounting systems such as CEA, who has just been introduced, the natural capital accounting, ecosystem service valuation, and so on, often try to integrate nature into frameworks that are compatible with national accounts and gross domestic product, right? Nonetheless, once you monetize or aggregate all those values, several problems appear. No? Actually, one of the main conclusions of the IPBES report on the diverse values and valuation of nature is that a focus or an over-focus on market values, instrumental values, short-term profit, and economic growth has come at the expense of both nature, society, and future generations, as it has often ignored the values of indigenous peoples, local communities, and so on. No? So these reports make the case that politics have failed to capture the many ways nature is important to people. We have not been able to register those values in a comprehensive way and articulate them well enough in the decision-making process. This has led to lots of conflicts around the world. I have witnessed one quite closely here in Norway among the indigenous peoples, the Sami people in northern Norway. The plans for the green energy transition of the government were too narrowly focused on economic values, the idea that this would create decarbonization, but also growth and jobs and so on. And many of the values that the indigenous communities held very high, such as the subsistence values for the reindeer herding, the cultural values of the traditional knowledge, the biodiversity of the areas where the wind farms are being installed, the aesthetic values of those landscapes, and the sacred values they attribute to these areas were vastly underestimated, and this resulted in large-scale mobilizations, resulting in indigenous peoples occupying government buildings in Oslo and so on, things that are very rare in the very calm and peaceful Norway, but that actually happened because environmental conflicts very often reflect this type of value conflicts. No? The other important problem here is, of course, that maybe we're pushing the domain of money to domains where they do no longer belong. No? So this is, of course, a question of to which extent we want nature to be governed by market values and norms, or if there are elements of nature where we believe money is not the most meaningful measurement rod, it's not the most meaningful way of capturing the value of nature. This idea that we can reduce the values of ecosystem services to money is quite new to economic thinking. If we look what the classical economists had to say about this, classical economists recognized ecosystem services. They did not, avant la lettre, they did not have this word coined yet, but they talked about the gifts of nature and so on. Ricardo, for instance, said, David Ricardo, natural agents are serviceable to us by adding to value in use, but as they perform the work gratuitously, as nothing is paid for the use of the air, the heat, or and the water, the assistance which they afford us adds nothing to value in exchange. So they thought of ecosystem services within their theoretical bodies, but they thought of them as use values that could not be necessarily commensurated in monetary terms. No. Well, that we accept that that we cannot reduce all values of nature to one single metric. Does it mean we can no longer make informed, rational decisions, as we can do, for instance, with decision support methods like cost-benefit analysis? Well, no, it's not the case. We also have other decision support methods, such as multi-criteria evaluation, that are able to accommodate different valuation languages, different values, different units of accounting, right? So this is one of the frameworks I developed for the team report, where it was for the first time, I think, in one of these reports, we were integrating monetary values with non-monetary values, but also with biophysical accounting. No? This is yet another example of integrated valuation of ecosystem services. I know there's a lot of information packed in here, but basically what it tries to show is you know, how we have in nature different types of values, ecological values, sociocultural values, economic values, and how capturing these distinct values in meaningful ways actually will need, often require a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods. Some of these values render themselves better to qualification than quantification. And I'm very interested, and hopefully I can get some feedback or I will learn something from this conference about the extent to which official statistics and national accounts can incorporate qualitative dimensions. No? Well, things have been moving quite fastly, and from the literature we have been the jump to IPBES, and the plural valuation of nature. And now, as I was saying, this report that was endorsed by close to 150 governments worldwide acknowledges this incommensurability of values, this value pluralism, and encourages statistical bodies and decision-making processes to take into considerations these different types of values: social, cultural values, economic values, health values, biophysical values, and so on. So coming to an end, basically, to some extent, environmental accounting can accommodate incommensurability by using batteries of multiple indicators, avoiding over-reliance on monetary valuation, preserving qualitative dimensions, recognizing ecological limits and thresholds effects and the kind of implications these have for the way we value and account for nature, and accepting that some values remain irreducible. Some people say, well, it's better some ill-defined value than no value. I am of the opinion that sometimes it's better to have a non-monetary, it's better to have no value than a meaningless value when it comes to money. Some things we have to accept that, things like spirituality, attached to nature, place values, aesthetic values, really money is a domain where it does not belong. It cannot capture this in a meaningful way. Of course, official statistics cannot fully escape the problem of commensuration because there are always commensuration pressures because states and markets generally demand these standardized categories for decision making. No? So in practice, the goal is not usually to solve completely the problem of incommensurability, but also actually to make it visible, institutionalize value pluralism, and prevent the dominance of a single, often monetary valuation logic. I'll leave it here. Thank you so much for your presentation, for your for listening, and I look forward to any comments or critiques or questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Is there some question, brief question in the room or online? No. We can go on, and this is Aldo.
I always have a question. Thank you, Eric, for this very, very nice presentation. But the question is, don't you think that the different approaches can coexist? Meaning some people want to see the total economic value in the perspective of neoclassical economics. Some other people want to see biophysical values. Now, I have my own strong opinions on this, and I'm not going to tell them again. I've had many occasions too, but I would like to hear your opinion about the possibility of having that kind of representation, which could be a green GDP or total economic value framework next to all other information, including the plural monetary values approach, which will be shown later in the session.
Thank you very much, Aldo. It's a very relevant question. Yes, the short answer is yes. Of course, there is room for coexistence of different approaches, but there are also limits to their integration. No, this is one of the debates now in ecological economics that makes a strong case for methodological pluralism, and that often has, these kind of approaches of total economic value has coexisted with more plural valuation approaches and so on. But ultimately, there are also limits because here you are actually putting together frameworks that depart from different pre-analytical assumptions and that are not actually consistent with each other. No? To some extent, it's also a matter of, so I believe in this type of pluralism, but it must be some kind of structured pluralism. No? There must be some kind of consistent epistemological or axiological basis, I believe, underpinning the evaluation and accounting processes. Of course, we can use batteries of different indicators. All of you know for sure the case of Bhutan with gross happiness index and so on, how they integrate all these different dimensions. It includes as well the monetary dimensions with many others. But I think we also have to understand a little bit the notion of conflicts between different values. This is what I was trying to illustrate with the example of the environmental conflicts going on with the Samis, with indigenous peoples in northern Norway. No? Because in the end, whether we it's also a matter of the kind of political system we want to have, the kind of governance systems we want to have for nature. Do we want nature, things like water? Do we want it to be, a public good or a sacred element in nature, as it is in many cultures? Or do we want it to be a commodity? No. we have to remember that monetization is not an innocent, it's not just a measurement tool. It's also, it can also provide metrical technology for commodification that from some perspectives can be seen as undesirable. So putting monetary values on things that we believe should not be for sale, that should be public goods or common goods, can be problematic because you can actually be paving the way for their commodification by creating the technical technology you need to articulate them into markets. No, so basically it's about a decision. What kind of environmental governance systems we want to have in place, what kind of values do we want to have governing different elements of nature, and that has implications for the kind of units or the valuation systems we choose. No, this would be at least my reflection. I want to emphasize this idea that valuation processes and accounting processes are not entirely neutral. They are so-called value articulating institutions, and they have implications for the way we make decisions about nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. There's a question from the room.
Grazie. So, Eric, thank you very much. My name is Paul Eakins, and I come from University College London, and it's very nice to be part of this event. I think IPBES has taken this articulation of diverse values to a new level, and I've been very interested to read those reports and to hear very sophisticated presentations like your own. But the fact remains that these ideas have been around for a very long time. I remember a paper published by a previous professor at UCL called "How Much for Your Grandmother?", which was a very clear articulation of different values and the impossibility of putting money values on such things as families, for example, which is a major source of value for many people. Then there was another paper by Ravets and a co-author whose name I forget, about the value of songbirds. And that was in the 1980s, which again was a very clear articulation of different values, different value systems. The impact that these ideas made on the policy-making apparatus has been precisely zero and continues to be precisely zero. Simply because it seems to me the policymakers either are reflecting the dominance of economic values in the society in which we live, in which most people seem perfectly happy to trade off any kind of values for increased incomes, or policymakers finding it very, very difficult to articulate these values in a manner that is broadly comprehensible to the society at large. I just wonder if you could reflect, because no doubt you're involved in many of these policy processes, perhaps with the Sami people in Norway. I'd just like you to reflect, what do you think needs to happen for us actually to pay some attention to these different value systems in the real world? Because at the moment, they are completely below the radar of practical policy making.
Thank you. Sorry, Eric, before you answer the question, stop sharing your presentation.
Should I share my, stop sharing, of course. Okay. Thank you, Paul. And good to see you. Yes, I get your, I actually get what you say. It's true that this conversation has been around for very long. It's been around for also in the Vienna circle by Otto Neurath, and the accountants of the 1920s were also discussing all these issues around incommensurability and so on. So it's a very long discussion, and it's true that it has limited effect on decision making. But my feeling, but maybe it's just that I'm very naive, is that something is actually starting to move right now. So for the, you know, in the 80s, 90s, and so on, it was a few ecological economists praising in the wilderness. But actually, I think the fact that IPBES has endorsed this approach, hopefully it will give basis for scaling this up further into integration of statistical bodies, decision-making process, and so on. After all, it's an official document, as I said, signed by governments, no, which is very different from a few academics on the margins saying this and that, no. So it is my hope that this will give basis to further incorporation in decision making. What it exactly takes for this to be taken more seriously? Well, I think it's a problem of hegemony, no. You know, what kind of yes, we have come to the idea that everything can be monetized, but it's not entirely true. So through history, we have always decided that some things should not be monetized, that belong to different domains of value, and not simply have we put some limits to commodification, but sometimes we have engaged in process of decommodification. No, so for instance, for centuries we were valuing humans in money through slavery, and at some point we decided to create humans an externality. It's better that humans remain an externality than a market internality, no? And we use other valuation languages such as human rights and so on. In the Middle Ages, we were also paying indulgence letters to the church to get rid of our sins. So also spirituality and sins were monetized. And at some point, we also abolished this practice because we believe it was a domain where money did not belong. No? So I think in the end, and still today, we decide that some things should not be for sale. We don't sell children. We don't, you know, we still have some limits. Some things are in the limit of the discussion. Should we allow bumps for rent? Should we allow women to pay people in other countries to carry their pregnancies and so on? All these things are in the end political struggles about what should be the limits of money. So in the end, I think it's a kind of political question about hegemony, no? And you know, some countries, especially those that have strong influence from indigenous peoples and so on, have managed to articulate new value articulating institutions into decision-making processes by granting rights of nature and so on that are replacing to some extent these monetization approaches. No, so there are two ways to go. One way is to say, okay, we need to monetize everything because it's the only language that decision makers understand and so on. And the other one is to say, well, you know, if you have a decision maker that only understands monetary values, maybe we have to replace that decision maker by someone that actually is able to understand the plurality and the diversity of values in nature. I don't entirely agree, Paul, that this reflects societal values. If you talk to people around, people do not think of everything around monetary terms. People are able to recognize the different values. This is something I realized quite strongly, for instance, interviewing people in connection to this environmental conflict in Norway. So I do not have the golden answer to your question, Paul, but I believe it's about to keep pushing and to try to gain hegemony around this idea that we have to consider a plurality of values. And if countries like Bhutan have already implemented it, why couldn't we do it in other countries as well?
Thank you, Eric. Aldo asked if you can show you on the camera, if it's possible.
The camera for me, it's not, I cannot click it, so I guess it's not under my control.
It doesn't matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you so much.
This is the monument of Jan Kervinion from the École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées, Institut Polytechnique de Paris, who will present arguments in favor of a set of accounts consistent with the standard component of the system environmental economic accounts, highlighting the economic costs of the ecosystem degradation. You may go.
Hello, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will share my slides. Can you see them?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to speak to you today about something we've been presenting several times, but I will present it in a slightly different way, so that I hope I can convince you that there are things to try that are worthwhile regarding monetary accounts beyond ecosystem services accounts. So. I'm Yann Carvigno. I'm from École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées, an engineering school in France, and I'm also associate researcher at the International Center for Research on Environment and Development, and this is basically here where I conduct research on these topics. So we mentioned it this morning during the introduction, but also I think yesterday you discussed as well about it. There is a persistent tension regarding how we should monetize, or how we should organize the monetary account, and there are those chapters 8 to 11 in the SEA EA that leave open the possibility of exploring different valuation approaches, maybe to reflect some of the issues, to account for some of the issues that were discussed in the previous talk. So in this presentation, what I'll do is to give an argument for cost-based framing, which will be connected to policy targets, and I will insist on that, and that may be what distinguishes the approach with the sustainability gap. For instance, I saw that Paul is in the room. To say hello, Paul, and maybe this is something which differs and where we can discuss. And what I want to argue is that this can be conceptually sound. This can be statistically tractable, or at least we should try to check for that. And it could be a way to capture the cost of ecosystem degradation, which can be as well very useful. But before entering this, I need to make some semantic clarification, because when we speak about cost-based approaches, there's a lot of confusion, and we see that the terms have evolved across the different versions of the SEA. So in the 1993 versions, we spoke about cost borne and cost caused values. So, but afterwards, we've been speaking about cost-based approaches, and cost-based approaches sometimes could mean restoration cost-based, which is the terms that we can see in the latest version of the SEA EA, and this corresponds to what's on the right of the screens now. And sometimes cost-based approach can be as well a replacement cost approaches to value ecosystem services. So for instance, you have water purification, and you would assess the value of these ecosystem services according to the cost of the alternative technologies that would do the same as the ecosystem, or at least as a similar a service as similar as possible as what the ecosystems provide. So sometimes we use cost-based, this idea of cost-based approach in either of the two columns that you see on the screens. What I'll be arguing for today is really what's on the right. So what we can call, according to, let's say, the modern formulation, restoration cost-based approaches, even though as you see, I say maintenance and restoration, because sometimes we just don't need to restore, but maybe we need to enhance, or we need to maintain, and this is especially critical in a context of climate change. So on the right, this is basically what we're speaking about, and using the old vocabulary, we can say the cost of ecosystem degradation. So I hope this clarification makes it clear. So in this perspective, we can define an aggregate monetary value, which can be disaggregated, which we can call an ecological debt. Ecological debt could be defined as the cost that would have to be incurred to attain a green reference levels on dimension of interest of ecosystem extent and condition. So you see that this is a very specific way to see reference conditions. But if reference conditions are related to, let's say, a collective target, then we can define liabilities, commitments to achieve the target. So this is what was proposed by André Vanoli, who worked a lot on the system of national account. And maybe if you want to see a bit about how he argued for that, there's a paper, I think the first paper where he proposed that was published in 1995, but his latest paper in 2017 is also very clear and very worthwhile reading. More recently, this was applied to climate liabilities by Germain and Lelouch, who computed some kind of prospective debt. I will come back to that later on. And what we propose in a later paper is to extend that to ecosystem, or at least to explore this idea. So why? So now I will present you the proposal with some hints at some critical part of the method. One thing that we propose is to use reference levels that are not purely scientific, that are related to targets for a sustainable ecosystem management. Using targets is a way to elicit some kind of collective values, and this is what we argue, that when we set targets, then the cost of meeting them can be considered as an implicit valuation of ecosystem degradation. And this is conceptually important, because especially for ecosystem management, as I just put one quotation of Amartya Sen, who was very much involved in the discussion of beyond GDP, and when we speak about ecosystem management, values may not be very, especially individual values, may not be stable, and deliberation, public discussion may be required to elicit those values. And this has been discussed a lot in ecological economics, leading to provide ways to elicit values that are deliberated collectively, etc., etc. So what we propose is to use targets as, let's say, what price do, a reflection of collective preferences. So, for instance, when we manage the marine ecosystems, we have sets of targets that are organized according to a European directive in the EU, which proposes to each member state to set targets according to 11 dimension descriptors of the good ecological status of the marine ecosystems. So in this setting, we could organize accounts that would be useful to assess how far we are from the targets, and as well what it would cost to achieve them. When we look at those targets, and basically when we look at sustainable ecosystem management targets, I wanted to emphasize that we can organize dimensions of interest according to a lot of different dimensions. And for instance, in the SEA, we have a lot of categorization that are proposed, let's say, according to ecosystem condition indicators, according to natural sciences, let's say. But we could also try to organize those dimensions regarding a typology of values. And if we do that for the marine strategy for the marine ecosystems in Europe, we can see that we have targets that are components of the ecosystem we want to conserve. We are attached for many reasons: dolphins, sea turtles, etc., etc. So there are let's say heritage value that leads to set specific targets which are to conserve, to preserve some specific features of the ecosystem. We also have targets that are related to the fact that we don't want to cross thresholds, and we want to ensure that ecosystems are resilient enough to face the pressure they undergo. We all know the planetary boundaries. This is a planetary boundary kind of reflection, but for the marine ecosystems, for instance, we have targets regarding the amount of plastic that could of macro waste that reach the sea, for instance. And we also have a component, for instance, the state of fisheries. You see that when we set targets regarding the state of fisheries, we don't set them in the same way as if we wanted to would we be willing to conserve some specific features, etc., etc. We have different thresholds. For instance, the maximum sustainable yield a dimension that is very much linked to a specific use of the ecosystem. What's interesting is to see that for this integrated management framework, when we count the number of descriptors that belong to each categories, the most numerous are belong to the category of the center, the functionality dimension, meaning that we actually set targets, and we commit to have expenses to achieve those targets that are related to a kind of a precautionary behavior regarding ecosystems. So just keep that in mind. This is just something that I will come back later. So now what do we propose? So we propose that when we deal with ecosystem condition, in ecosystem monitoring, so for instance in the implementation of ecosystem accounting, we ensure that we have all those dimensions of interest, maybe not the only one, and there could be other dimensions, but we ensure that we monitor what counts regarding sustainable management, meaning that what we want to conserve, we monitor those dimensions. Where we think there are important risks to the functionality, we monitor those dimensions. Where we have important uses, we monitor those dimensions. And then from this use perspective, we can derive the ecosystem services accounts, but we could also produce economically meaningful indicators from the whole set of indicators, including those belonging to the heritage and functionality dimensions. How do we define that? We define ecosystem degradation as the distance between the actual status of the different the actual level of the indicators as compared to the reference level. This would be the biophysical definition of ecosystem degradation. And from this degradation, just as for the sustainability gap indicator, the monetary sustainability gap is defined as well as in the same way, we try to capture what expenses, what efforts would be required so that we actually achieve the targets. So this is one way to set on one dimension and a meaningful and providing a meaningful information. What is the efforts needed to achieve those dimensions, to achieve those reference level. So how, practically speaking, we compute them? There are two ways to do that. One is to model the costs. And this is what will be what Germain Lelouch did, for instance, for climate. And this is basically something which could be explored for ecosystem management. So we would need either technico-economic, either macroeconomic models. There are different techniques, etc. We discussed that in the paper. Or we could, as well, as I said, the concept of ecological debt is related to liabilities, and depending on who is liable to achieve the targets among the different economic units in the accounting system, we could imagine as well a bottom-up system, maybe in a longer term perspective, and in relation to all what's required in the context of the CSRD, etc., etc. But in this context, in the reporting, the sustainability corporate sustainability reporting directive, for instance, there are things that are reported, and we could, if they are normalized enough, imagine that we tend towards a system where we could infer, aggregate from this type of accounting information. These are two different ways of computing the cost. And what could be emphasized, and this is discussed in the paper as well, is that depending on the perspective, the scope of the cost covered, for instance, whether we cover opportunity costs or not, may differ. So this is as well something which could be interesting to look closer. So what I'm proposing basically already exists for climate. And I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because Sébastien Roux from INSEE will present similar work. Work that include a comparable approach for climate. What's challenging in this case is that when we want to extend the work for ecosystems, it's not a simple extension of climate. I mean, I mentioned models, for instance, if we want to compute a meaningful indicator, but models do not exist, or at least they are not as advanced as we have models, technico-economic models, for instance, of the cost of mitigating GES emissions. We don't have similar models, and the problem with ecosystem management is that it's multidimensional. So this is not simply, or it's not a simple extension for sure. So I also wanted to compare this approach, this valuation approach, to what's been discussed in a recent paper, and maybe afterwards, the connected values framework, and to insist that it's not the same, and it's not easy to connect them, but still there are possible connections for this restoration cost-based approach. So what's important is that in the plural value framework is to recognize the importance of the plurality of monetary values, and there is not the monetary values, but monetary values that can be meaningful in a context. What's interesting is to see that if we recognize targets we use targets, actually institutionalized targets as reference levels, then we can say that we define somehow ecosystem services. So, for instance, for climate, we commit to carbon neutrality, and hence everything that is the achievement of this objective has actually economically tangible benefits, meaning reducing the cost of the transition. And this is basically something which could define an ecosystem services, and we could say that this could be extended. So, for instance, for policy targets regarding to ecological connectivity, for instance? Would we have projects that would harden the achievement of the maintenance of ecological connectivities in some landscape? Then this would be a cost to society because we'd have to make greater efforts, costly efforts to achieve those targets. So this is something which is a connection which I think is possible, but would we do it? We would need to do it in a structured way to be a bit more exhaustive than what we are now. And most importantly, and this is what I say at the bottom of the slide, changing this perspective is also an important shift in purpose and productive. So when we value ecosystem services, we are still on the question of whether what targets, what ambition we should have regarding ecosystem management. But what we need actually is also to have information, useful information about how to achieve those targets efficiently. And we don't have much information produced through the accounts that are framed for the moment. And to conclude, I wanted and maybe to answer a bit the question of Paul as well. I think we need to be more explicit about how the statistical information produced in the SEA would actually be used by policymakers and how it would be used. And in the paper, we actually try to do that. It's still a bit speculative because we need to confront then these assumptions to the actual practice of policymakers. But we've not done that enough to my mind, and this may be why we see a little intake by policymakers. So, for instance, this approach, why would it be useful? It would be useful first to question the indicators we have in our condition accounts. Would we have an important policy target that is not reflected in condition accounts? Maybe that would be worthwhile considering including that. It would also be useful to the policy process because it would shift the focus to how achieve target efficiently, producing informations on the way. And maybe in connection to the first presentation, what's important may not be the macro indicator that we aim at. It's all what is produced on the way. Just as when we compute the GDP, we also produce information that is useful to assess inflation, for instance. For nature management, there may be useful information on the way, and we discussed that as well in the paper. And eventually, and I think there is a roundtable that is coming this afternoon regarding this question, we may produce aggregate macro indicator that can be meaningful and useful for communication. So that's the proposal, and I have to admit that it may not be deemed realistic, and what we need now is a proof of concept. So we need to try to see how this can be made operational and whether it is realistic enough. So that's where we are on this endeavor. And I remind here some of the important messages I wanted to share with this presentation, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan. I don't know if it's possible, but I would request to postpone the question to the general discussion because we are very late. So thank you very much for your interesting presentation, and we will do the discussion after the presentation of Alessio. Thank you. So, Alessio, the floor is yours. Alessio Capriolo dell'Istituto Superiore per la Ricerca Ambientale ISPRA, who in strictly cooperation with Aldo present their concern about the ecosystem accounting monetary approach. The reason is that the proposed pricing often does not reflect the true importance of the ecosystem and even tends to underestimate their interpretation. Go on, Alessio.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mrs. President. Let me first thank ISTAT for hosting this event. And I was particularly grateful when I received this invitation because I do believe that there is still a lot to say, a lot to discuss on this particular topic of measurement of nature. Although, as Professor Paul Ekins has just said before, and I agree, the debate started a long time ago, more than 40 years ago, but there is still a long way to go, in my opinion. And a special thanks also to my friend and colleague Aldo Femia, other than being the main scientific organizer of this event, is also the co-author of this presentation. So I work in ISPRA, and I'm the head of the economic evaluation and more other things in the institute. I do apologize immediately if I repeat some concepts that have already been touched in the previous presentation. But let me first start saying that ecosystem accounting or natural capital accounting has been introduced basically with this aim. If we want to preserve nature, we have to start measuring nature to highlight the relevance that nature has for economy and society. The tenor of the things that, of the concepts that were said by the supporters of these initiatives were headings such as to make nature counts. We heard about these headings during the previous presentation, or we make to make natural values more visible in order to mainstream these values into the decision-making process or into the optimal decision for investments, for instance, including externalities. And this was said basically on the assumption, on the main assumption that monetary metrics is supposed to be intelligible to all. And this metric is able to convey very easily a clear message to politicians, to decision makers, primarily. Nevertheless, we do believe that monetary valuation is still a controversial matter. And I'm going to explain some reason because we believe that it is still. First, a couple of important milestones that have already been mentioned, but I will mention them again because of the specific linkages to what I'm saying. The first was the release of the statistical status for the biophysical valuation components by the UN, so the well-known SEAEA, where monetary values meant as prices didn't get the status of the statistical standard. And Francesca, our president, this morning mentioned this step. But it was just dedicated to monetary valuation, a specific section in principles and recommendations, meaning, in our opinion, that there wasn't an agreement on how to consider and how to treat this important valuation. And then one more milestone refers to the recent regulation that was introduced to revise a previous regulation related to environmental accounts. And in the new version, where ecosystem accounts were introduced for the first time, it is specifically stated that the aim of establishing monetary values should be to raise visibility on the cost of non-action. So basically, we called this presentation connected values to nature, to ecosystem services. But the presentation is more in general about monetary valuation and the way that it should be understood and treated properly to avoid misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and misleading messages, especially to politics and decision makers. So the approach that I'm presenting now was first conveyed to the Italian Natural Capital Committee. I'm a member of that committee on behalf of my institution, and was released in, if I remember well, in the fourth report. And then it was proposed to Eurostat, enriched by some very outstanding inputs from other member countries, such as Estonia, Austria, Spain, France, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, as a contribution to a feasibility study that the Eurostat had to present. And it will be presented in June, as far as I remember. The study was around, the first step to discuss the assessment of methodological possibilities and the feasibility of monetary valuation. And our position paper had the aim to purposely, concretely highlight the reason why the mainstreaming price approach, in other words, the approach that attributes a price to the exchange value of nature, doesn't serve the purpose to represent the importance of nature, that we said it's the main goal of the application of monetary valuation, and the cost of non-action. So why is it still a controversial matter? For more than one reason. First of all, we have to consider the consistency with the economic theory and moral implication. I will be very briefly on that. And then secondly, it's important to respect, to be in accordance with the consistency with accounting principles and procedure. And then we have to look also at the information and communication implications. I said at the beginning that the point is not to be against the monetary valuation, but we have to be careful to the messages that they have behind and that they convey to stakeholders. And then we don't have to neglect or to ignore the risk of misusing. That is exactly the consequence of having a bad, distorted message. Let's start from the consistency with the economic theory that has some moral implication. So prices basically reflect scarcity in the best way. But more frequently, they are the consequence, the outcome of something else, of other factors that has an impact on the formation of price. And in this case, we talk about, first of all, institutional arrangements that mean obligation, regulation, or restriction in the access, in the use of a particular ecosystem service. But we might look especially at the distortion that are generated by different market structures. It's enough to think about how dominant position in markets are able to influence price formation. But also, we can look at the inequalities in purchasing power and other factors. So basically, the point here is that using markets as a reference context for establishing a cost of non-action, we call it in different way yesterday, today. The measurement of nature, they are synonyms. Cost of non-action, the loss of services that are essential, appears rather questionable. When I say essential service, I mean service that are essential for the survival of human beings, so without which human beings are not able to survive, and essential also because we wouldn't be able to produce almost anything, almost any goods and services without nature or these essential services. It appears questionable because nature is not an ordinary or a collection of ordinary goods, and it should have been treated as an ordinary goods where scarcity might work in price formation. And there is immediately a critical point. If we think that the monetary matrix is able to homogenize almost everything, to overlap almost everything, and to reduce all the goods and services under this umbrella to a fungible, substitutable, interchangeable, and additive, because everything can be added to everything, replaceable and reproducible value. Why this raised the first paradox? Because if the idea of using a monetary valuation was initially due to preserve nature, then here we face a very bizarre thing, that if we admit substitutability, then we admit that we can replace nature with something else, and we fail in the precise aim that we had. Let's move to the consistency that is necessary with the accounting principle. Here, we might argue that pricing is legitimate in 2 cases out of 3. Is legitimate in the first 2 cases when an ecosystem service is actually the object of a transaction, of an exchange. This is the case of carbon permits in the tradable markets, or the case of a payment of ecosystem services. So we have basically observable price, observable values, observable incomes that we call rents. The second case refers to the ecosystem services exchange value that is embodied in something else, in goods and services that are transacted in a market. And this is the case of other examples, such as the price of a hotel room, or what is embodied in the overall value of a crop, for instance. And then here, we call them implicit rents. The third case is the case of the illegitimate use of pricing. And it concerns the exchange value of something else that is illegitimately and arbitrarily assumed as if it was the exchange value of an ecosystem services, and use it as if it was, but it's not. It's something different. It's just a connected or dependent value, because it differs from the income that is actually derived from owning or using the ecosystem services. What do I mean for connected or dependent value? We had the chance to see it already in the previous presentation. We are referring to potential cost and benefits arising such as avoided damage cost, replacement cost, restoration cost, and we saw also before maintenance protection cost potentially rising. And these values may convey a very interesting information, although they are not the exchange value of the ecosystem services itself. Information that might be extremely useful for policymakers only if correctly communicated and understood. We release also in this case some very interesting estimates of ecosystem services in the fourth report on the state of natural capital in Italy. But then we will have also very interesting classification of this kind of connected values and dependent values from Estonia, with some application in Estonia and Netherlands from Kaia Horas after the break, if I remember well. Then we announced it. We have an important information issue that we have to address. We got from scientific literature and from practical applications that legitimate pricing most of the time provides very low values. And this is the claim that, for instance, our dear colleague of Bank of Italy are telling us each time that we organize a debate with them, that they are not able to understand if these figures are low, are high, how are they? Because they need to get a number, but then they get confused with number and for which reason, for which purpose. Because if we have very low figures, then we get confused in the aim, in the goal that we want to achieve, probably. But then we have insignificant and neglectable figures simply because the ecosystem services have no production cost. And they depend completely upon institutional settings. If we look then at the rents in particular, we realize that even though they are exchange value of ecosystem services, they basically represent a different concept primarily. They are the outcome of a negotiation between factors of production. And so they refer more to an income distribution issue than to represent the actual importance of an ecosystem as an input to production. On the other hand, illegitimate exchange values, and we already described what they are, so I won't repeat them, might provide the most interesting figures in terms of order of magnitude. But they are connected values, dependent values, and not the exchange value of the ecosystem service. So they are important, not only because of their order of magnitude, but because they convey very relevant information. That we said it has to be communicated in a proper way, because we have to preserve the information that they have, that there is behind the monetary valuation. Because if we have an avoided cost, politicians have to realize that the meaning of the monetary metric that is behind the valuation refers to avoided cost. That is not the same if they have to take a decision, an important decision on how to manage nature. It's not the same if we consider replacement cost or restoration cost. So the use of monetary metrics has to preserve the information that is behind, the meaning that is behind this information. And also we have to keep in mind, we have to realize that this information concerning the different categories that we have just mentioned on the monetary values, they are not generally homogeneous. They cannot be, they don't have the additive property. We cannot, if we don't want to lose information, we shouldn't add avoided cost to replacement cost without understanding that we are adding different components of information. We would lose this important and useful information. So monetary valuation, it's important to remember that they have an extremely powerful communication impact. And that's why we have to use them in the right way. Also because I wanted to address a bit the point from Professor Paul Atkins from before. It's evident that the reason because a lot of supporters of monetary valuation have decided to come up with such a proposal to integrate this kind of monetary accounts into decision making comes from the awareness that something didn't work so far. This is clear, that just to talk about the creation of natural protected area is not enough. That just to talk about, to discuss about restrictions or quotas didn't work so far in the way that we wanted to. But now the point is that we might discover also the other way around, that using monetary valuation in the wrong way might be even worse than not using them. That's the point. So, in our opinion, the importance of the ecosystem service shouldn't follow price fluctuations. Because we might experience that having an increase in monetary value that is the consequence of some other factors, and we mentioned before, market regime, the presence of a dominant position, or other institutional arrangement, might be at the same time with a decrease in biophysical quantity or deterioration in the ecological status of ecosystem services. More in general, overpricing doesn't tell us something about natural values or the fact that the natural values is increasing actually, but only that nature is becoming less accessible or more accessible to wealthy people. We call it, just as I recall of the literature, the drift to luxury good paradox, but the concept that is behind it clear. And then there is also another paradox that we call the overexploitation paradox, that it works in two different directions. It works when you get high economic value when an ecosystem services is particularly exploited and overused. And this is the case, for instance, of nature-based tourism, when you might have a site of a particular ecological status visited by many tourists that might generate an enormous income, but then we lose the information on the sustainability of this natural site. Or even worse, we become aware that there is an overexploitation of that site. But this might be also the case of another very important ecosystem service, the flood mitigation service, where the higher the demand is for protecting anthropic assets, such as buildings, such as industries, that are potentially covered and protected by these ecosystem services, and the more the higher is the economic value. So in this regards, the paradox is that the more you have soil consumption, the higher is the demand of the services, but then it's not a good news overall what we have. Or the other way around, the opposite example, when you have low values in terms of monetary valuation, but simply because you have protected areas that is so protected that it's not used, it's not commercially exploited, and it doesn't generate income. So the point is, be careful on the information that is behind this monetary valuation. And this brings us to the final conclusion. The alternative approach that have been presenting to you today, basically in its theoretical terms, and that will have more application examples in the following presentation, basically wants to tell us something in this direction, that monetary valuation is very much important, but it doesn't have to replace physical values, because the physical valuation still remain the most reliable indicator to understand what is going on to nature. We cannot give up looking primarily at physical valuation. Measures of rent-like income, as we saw before, that derive from the owning or the using of ecosystem services are interesting of their own for the meaning that they have. They are also already recorded in the system of national accounting, and are in most of the cases visible, tangible. In the remaining cases, monetary estimates that we said it represent something different, potential cost and benefit or economy-wide values dependent upon ecosystem services, may be the good representation that Eurostat is asking us for the cost of non-action. So let's remember the importance of the approach that we are proposing, that is simply a shift to highlight the importance of this dependent and connected value approach, which are not the exchange value of nature, because they clarify and they keep the information, the useful information that politician, decision maker should be interested in. They prevent from undervaluing nature, because we made it clear because of the order of magnitude that they bring, and they respect, they are neutral with respect to nature commodification. But it's important to say, apart from our personal opinion, it's not under the umbrella of the statistics, but it's up to the choice of a politician. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessio, for your interesting presentation. And I'm sorry to say that we have to postpone the discussion because the coffee break is time for coffee break. So, thank you. See you soon. Hi, everybody. So, we have almost 30 minutes. We are almost 30 minutes late. So, I would ask you if it's possible to postpone the 10 minutes of discussion after the Kaya intervention, and now begin with their presentation. I give the floor to Kaya Oras from Statistic Estonia. Kaya's contribution is the presentation of work in progress on values connected to ecosystem services. So Kaya, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, so do I manage to share a screen? Just a second. Let me know if you see a screen.
Yes, yes, we see it.
Okay, so a discussion did not take place yet, I understand, yes? No, no discussion yet. Okay. Okay, so
okay, the discussion will take place after your intervention.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, just a second. I try to make the things work here in this side of the table as well. Just a second. Okay. So good morning, good day, everyone. And I'm Kaia Oras, and I'm lead expert on environment statistics and accounts in Statistics Estonia. I've been dealing with different kind of environment statistics and accounts through the years, just not only ecosystem accounts, monetary values, so different kind of accounts have been kind of my expertise. And today we talk about how we have been working with monetary values related to ecosystem services. And we have been doing this work together with several people, and I have listed them here. We started the work years ago, and we have been looking to the different concepts, and we have been supported by Eurostat grants for developing this, taking this thing further. And today I try to tell you what we have got through and what we still plan to do. And I give a word in the middle of my presentation also to Sjoerd Senau, our collaborator and good colleague from Statistics Netherlands. We work also together, and to a professor of restoration ecology from Tartu University, Aveliina Helm, on a certain moment. So we deliver this presentation by three of us, and I try to find how to move the presentation further. Yeah, okay. So why to develop the analysis related to values connected to ecosystem services? And why it matters. Yeah, I think we have been just discussing this today already quite a lot, quite some, but in general. So monetary values nowadays are often expected. They link ecology and economy, and like we discussed today, they inform decisions. So these are important, and values are around. So we have to work on semantics. These values require careful interpretation and transparency, and by the same reason as these are used if they are around. But these methods and these interpretations and all the semantics, it's not yet part of CIE standard as we apply it nowadays, currently. And we experienced in Estonia that clear narratives are important, and both for the policy use and also the practical use when you actually have these figures, how to interpret them. So we understood there is a need to clarify the semantics of values, so bring together multiple value perspectives into a coherent system in order to support the use of these values for policy and for stakeholders, and also to make this ecological foundation behind the ecosystem services and these values more explicit. So it's also a question on interpretation. And where its work comes from, mentioned already, CIE International Statistical Standard. UN London Group asked already some years ago the work on this direction, so we have been contributing twice, and find a partner in ISTAT, so Aldo and Alessio, waving to you from here. And as we found it useful to apply the framework, which was already kind of discussed more from an economic science perspective, and from Alessia already described. But we have actually, I think, last year we have taken this framework further on, and I quickly now in short time tell you about this. And in meantime, the work was reviewed by UN London Group between two last London groups. So, and given a green light, could go ahead. And the scope is 7 ecosystem services, which are in Europe are regulated by the regulation on reporting regarding to ecosystem environmental economic accounts. And we have presented the work on ecosystem service partnership and conferences last on World Conference 11th and on a 6th Europe Conference. And who does the work? So I have listed the people here, international partners and Estonian academic partners. And just to very briefly, you see on the left corner, our international partners in Stats office is me, Gert Aldo, and our analysts in Statistics Estonia, upper left corner, our professors on the right side, who have contributed to the last study. And what we did, on the left side, you see the David Barton's scheme of plural values from already work from 2017, I guess, when Central Framework, CIEA white paper was in a preparation. So the scheme was presented, and you can find the reference in research literature as well to this plural values concept. There are others around as well. But we had a kind of a variety of monetary values on ecosystems, and what we did, we allocated these values. What we saw in statistics of mostly two kinds of actually figures which are produced by Stats Office, what you see in national accounts here and there are figures also produced by the researchers. There is a MAES type of mapping of assessment of ecosystem services type of activity carried out in Estonia. It's an ELME project, and there were also monetary values related to ecosystem services published. So we looked at those figures and we allocated this to the matrix, and the matrix is the one which was today described. So this is a multi-layer matrix, values related to ecosystem services, and you allocate it based on ecosystem service status, whether ecosystem service exists or does not exist, and monetary value status, whether it exists or is it in scenario appears, disappears. So we have this, and let's have a look. Matrix itself, this is, I know, difficult to grasp at first moment, but this whole field, I think it is complicated if you want to have a kind of overall figure view. And you have ecosystem service in scenario, so it exists, does not exist. And when you have a monetary value and exists, would appear, disappear. And when you have categories and types of values. And here are the methods what you actually allocate to this matrix, the results of the methods. And it basically you have a it is like not 4 but 6 corners, but here with ecosystems, then economic value appears, whereas it disappears. So basically it's 4 corners, and mainly market values up here on the left, monetization here up on the down on the left, and scenarios on the right side. And I give a reference also here to the publication. Who has not seen this concept yet can go and have a look. And I told you in the beginning, we worked together with Statistics Netherlands on the semantics on ecosystem services, monetary valuation, and we took 7 services, and we set them for Estonia and for the Netherlands. Try to allocate to matrix existing practices and services you see on the left. You see Estonia and Netherlands here, territory the same, GDP different, population 10 times different, and per capita GDP also different. So, but keep it in mind if you go through figures. And first, let's look at one of those 7 services, crop provision. So market values and the hidden contribution of ecosystem. So what do you see here? So in the left upper corner, you see the rent of a land, which is kind of a contribution to the ecosystem service. So rent of a land, and you see that it is different for Estonia and Netherlands, but it's as well economical structure of countries is different, the GDP is different. It's quite expected to see what it is, but and you have a resource rent type of the values for Estonia, green, and you see blue. Background Dutch figures, so you can look like this, and you have a value of a crops like a final product, which is quite often referred to and as ecosystem contribution. And on the right side here, you have an ecosystem service kind of in a scenario. And our researchers have kind of come up also with a figure that the ecosystem contribution is related to the value of actually the fertile soil, which is a precondition for the crop provision, and have calculated the value of a fertile soil as a precondition for the ecosystem service of a crop production, and also and we derived the yearly annuity out of it. So this is like 1.5 billion. But of course, it's a warning sign on this figure. And the Estonians' willingness to pay for the maintenance of these services 1.4 million, which is quite low, but it is already like the service is already, or a crop is already on the market. So probably Estonians think that which is the part of service already, so no need to pay extra for this ecosystem service. But I give word now to Sjurt to say something about the Dutch figures.
Thanks, Kaya, and also thanks for the invitation to participate in this very interesting meeting. Yes, at Statistics Netherlands, we are working together with Wageningen University to work on valuation of ecosystem services. We've been doing that for the last 6 years. And indeed, this is a very interesting but also complicated topic. So indeed, what we have been doing is we have looked at different ecosystem services, and as Kaya just explained, we have also tested different methods for possible valuation, or indeed these connected values that come from that. So indeed, in this example for crop provision, but we've also looked at other ecosystem services, of course. Here you see, in this case for the Netherlands, that we have tested different methods, and particularly we've looked at land rents and the resource rent method. And here you can see as an example that if you apply these methods, you come up with quite different figures. In this case, the resource rent was higher than the land rent figures. In addition, we also looked at the total crop value. And of course, this is a different kind of value, but still it's worthwhile looking at how much the final product for crops is. So this is an example of when you apply different methods, you can also get different values. But of course, key here is the interpretation of these values. And of course, the difficulty is communicating these kind of values. We have to give the right interpretation. Also, when we publish, as for example, as a statistical office, you have to give the right interpretation to these values. So this is for us also still work in progress, although we have started publishing these kind of figures. Also because in the Netherlands, there's quite a high policy demand for monetary values, as already also been mentioned in some of the other presentations. Okay, I leave it at that. Back to you, Kaya.
Yeah, thank you, Sjurt. And let's have a look at another provisioning services, which is a timber provision. And it is a bit different service, if you think. Yeah, so it's, as timber is accumulating to a stock, but agricultural production does not do it in that extent. So we have a timber asset value of 20 billion and bare land value without timber, but forest land value is 3.9 billion, but annuity, of course, much lower to derive this from land value. And if you look at the residual value of a forest activity, what could be considered also according to some concepts, also like an ecosystem contribution, it is at 171. And then if you look at the harvest, this is like what is entering the economy is 700 million. And but the increment, which is kind of ecosystem service, which is like the timber adding year by year to the timber stock. So that increment. So in that one is actually a bit lower than the harvest, which is entering the economy. And in case of Netherlands, of course, the figures are lower, as Estonia is a forest country, but the Netherlands is not. And there is also, you see that the reforestation subsidy, which is like 1.5 million, quite only, let's say, is quite low compared to the felling volumes entering, felled timber volumes entering, the value entering the economy. Okay, and in our case, other figures were not, we did not find in the literature, hypothetical values. Of course, they might they exist in theoretical sense, but in our studies, we did not. Our researchers did not identify that. And let's look at the pollination. So you see that the market signals are quite weak. So we have subsidies like less than million. On which is for establishing the fields that are attractive for the pollinators. But there is a strong economic dependency, and it's you see it on a right bottom column. There is a production change. If the pollinators would not pollinate the crop, the production change would be less 62 million. And in case of Netherlands, it is higher. And there are some other figures as well, like willingness to pay for enabling pollinators habitats, and it is quite low if we think of value of crop production value. Okay, and one more different kind of service from pollination, global climate regulation. So here you see the market flows, monetization upper left. So this is the direct observed volume of actual transactions, tradable permits, 250 millions, and the respective monetizations. So it's you have if you emission trading system prices per carbon sequestration, if you multiply it, and you can look at think of a stock as well in the same terms. But there are now hypothetical values. IPCC has been calculating the social cost of carbon. So what is the cost having carbon kind of in the atmosphere? So, and this gets to 2.5 trillion if you use the IPCC calculations and apply this to the stock. But the importance it is also to consider that the stocks are kind of starting to dominate, but for the flows, the figures are much kind of moderate. And in case of tight figures, you see the flow figures. And if you think now again of this ecosystem service exist, does not exist, value observable, value appears, disappears. We just picked some of the figures here to show these differences in the magnitude of figures. So, but I do not start to repeat those, but I just say that with 2.5 trillions unit social cost of carbon, it is kind of like a warning signal, and meaning the projected cost of damage is avoided by keeping the carbon to ecosystems. Okay, and we presented this work to the London group and also gathered the feedback from our professors and experts, and we were urged to work further. And like you see, like you saw already also, that there are more possible values available, and maybe also the framework itself could be taken further, as we already started to adopt some of the columns, add the methods, think of other possibilities. So it's just Estonian and Dutch and feasible figures. So we've urged to work further, but also to bring in additional analysis, what is important from an economic point of view, like guidance of go to input-output analysis and to follow who directly uses this ecosystem service, start from who uses the ecosystem service to who ultimately depends on it, and to look into this part of our economy. And another point what was brought out by experts was that its social ecological characterization of a service is important. So you need kind of, if you have these monetary values, different monetary values, you actually kind of need for this ecosystem service a standardized profile, which describes these ecological and social conditions under which the service is delivered. So it makes the monetary values interpretable. And this, how important input-output analysis. So it goes beyond the first users. And standard ecosystem accounts, in sense how we kind of apply it currently, it identifies the first ecosystem service user. But like we mentioned already, it flows far beyond the first user, and input-output analysis lets us to follow it. And this is one missing link. This is a work we haven't been done, and we really would like to kind of take further, and we are kind of planning at the moment to do it. And we have taken also work together with Statistics Netherlands, and here is a reference to already carried out study, structure analysis, ecosystem accounting. So it's a report of an Eurostat grant report, and we intend to apply at least some of the methods applied there for a crop, nature tourism, but we will ourselves look more deeply also to timber or wood provision as ecosystem service, so to identify this part. And this is a scheme how it would look like, but it's in case of a farmer. You have any inputs in one side, the downstream calculation of a footprint, and you have an upstream calculation of a footprint. And yeah, and what it does give you, what these potential results show. So, so dependency, as we already mentioned, which economic sectors depend directly, indirectly, and you might want, and if you have done this analysis, you might be able to derive indicators, dependency indicators out of there on exports, households, final consumption. And this is one of examples what the Dutch study has calculated. 74% of crop provisioning benefit reaches domestic final consumers, 26 goes to exported activities. But there is much more in the report, and we're also looking to other indicators as well. So limitations, what does it not show? So it does not show what happens when ecosystem condition deteriorates. In one sense, it shows you with the lost value, but in another, like we heard yesterday from Mandy's presentation, that this can be very different with the curves. What we will see. So input-output analysis does not provide us these answers, and identifying which condition indicators drive this change, it remains qualitative at this stage. So it's just try to set the limits, and it's difficult to incorporate regulative services. So what is the logical next step? We will take like I mentioned, free ecosystem services. We will do the input-output analysis, but in another hand. So there was this another task as well. So linking condition indicators to service supply models. So this is something which we consider, and our researchers considered very important. And so this second idea was with social ecological perspective, the missing piece of puzzle. And here I hope that Avelina Helm is with us, Professor of Restoration Ecology, and will introduce this thinking. And Avelina has been also working together as IPAS for the years, I know.
Thank you so much, Kaia, and it's a pleasure to be here and super interesting presentations beforehand. Thank you for these discussions, Erik and Alessio and everyone. Yes, this particular kind of example here is work in progress that was derived from the fact that we, as ecologists looking to accounting side, also really see, and we all have expressed this concern today, that there might be lack of understanding of the ecological processes behind the valuation and different values. And there might also be a lack of understanding of critical limits to what these ecosystem services deliver, and what are also the kind of restoration costs, or even whether they are replaceable at all. So currently we are treating different ecosystem services in a quite similar level, but we thought of through this standardized kind of creation of socio-ecological characterization of services, we would then be able to highlight to all the account users also these basics about the ecology behind these services. So we thought, and this is very much all the ideas are welcome, that how to incorporate those, that this kind of socio-ecological characterization, the context box of each service and valuation for service can be accompanied with a standardized profile that summarizes the ecological and social conditions and dependencies under which these services are delivered and really depend on. So it could have a science-based sketch on the functions and processes that underpin this service in really simple terms for people to understand. Why not also quantify it as much as possible, but more to just create understanding. Then also have this vulnerability profile of the service, how really threatened is this service, how far are the threshold, and what are the conditions and pressures under which this service could be really badly influenced or even collapse. So this is additional basis just for interpreting the monetary values, and the basis for well, it could serve as a basis for just understanding and helping decision makers to really make sense behind the values. Kaia, if you switch them. So right now we made this exercise this way, that we created this one box of main categories for each ecosystem service that we assessed, or where we put those connected value systems, Kaia introduced, with very different valuations, with very different outcomes, and then outline those 6 points which should always accompany each of the assessment of the value. And they involve then the main ecosystem dependencies, like what are, this is basically also assessed in ecosystem condition in this series of condition service valuation, but it can include more, whether it can have information about negative drivers and the absence of those, and so on. So what is the ecosystem dependence that delivers this particular service? So also ecosystem resilience, how is it threatened at the moment? Then ecological processes and functions that are really critical for supporting this service, that are often overlooked or not really clear. Often, for example, the dependence of ecological interactions within the ecosystems in order to keep those functions that deliver this service that we later evaluate. And as well, in many cases, ecological work has provided critical ecological thresholds, that this is number 4 now, where it has shown, or it is possible to also identify where those critical borderlines are, where below what the delivery of ecosystem service is so much threatened that that the valuation number really does not make a sense anymore, or it needs to there needs to be very much concern or care involved in these particular values. And then fifth, what we also thought when looking all those numbers is that that they do not there needs to be the background of how replaceable or irreversible are those services that we evaluate. Sometimes, like in Kaia's example, the pollination can be valued very low in society, but its replaceability is actually very, very hard and very expensive. So these kind of these outcomes help to really understand what are those irreversibilities. In some other cases, it is easier to replace or to substitute the service that we value. And finally, also the data quality and confidence class of where this data comes from. We need to stop. Yes.
I interrupt you, but we finished the time. Really, we have no more space for the discussion. So
yes,
we are.
I am done now, and I give back to Kaia to finish. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Avelina has here also just example already done for pollination, and where already it's seen what it would look like if we will fill it for one service. Yeah, and how it works. And when it would kind of for there are free services here: pollination, global climate regulation, nature-based tourism. So we have a profile. You have this notion of a valid, not valid, or validity of a values, and then caution what to look and what to not to look upon. And so it doesn't provide the new numbers, as we said. But and our way forward is first is we try to go further with framework of the values to look at these also try to identify what where do you see with figures in national accounts, what is the typology, whether you can derive the indicators and dashboards out of it, like we discussed yesterday, of dashboards of indicators. And so it's a lot of work with semantics. So it depends also on the resources feasible, how much we can go further. And input-output analysis, we already described what the plan, and Avelina was talked about populating the socio-ecological perspective under which the service is delivered. And links are in the presentation also for our articles on London Group, and we plan next presentations in August on YARIF conference in Brussels, and UN London Group also in September 2026. And let's see whether we can get to the ESP 2027, so it's a result of our work, ESP's Ecosystem Service Partnership. But, thank you, and sorry to go over time. It was difficult to kind of to balance it in sense of time, and not clear how much one has to be explained this.
I open now the floor for discussion for the three last presentations. We have, I think, only 10 minutes, and then we come back to the other two presentations. Please stay on time. Thank you.
Hi, morning everyone. Yes, my task here is to read the possible questions that were posed by participants online. And yes, there is a question to Alessio Capriolo that I will read right now. Is the Natural Capital Committee or ISPRA studying how to include natural capital in public administration financial statements according to the new accrual method? And then there is a reference to the PNRR reform. natural capital as asset, for example, IPSAS 45 for historical heritage. What do you think about this topic? And the question was posed by Jacopo Chiara from the Piemonte region. So Alessio.
Thank you for this question. Actually, we do hope that with the presentation, with the thinking around the topic that we addressed this morning, first of all, we hope that we are on the track also on the track of the direction of the question. But more than that, I think that the new obligations coming from the implementation of the regulation of the introduction of the ecosystem account will be asking more and more to produce information in terms more of satellite accounts exactly on the evaluation of flows and hopefully one day on stocks of the ecosystem services.
Thank you, Alessio. There's a question from Sonia Carrera.
Thank you. A question for Ian on the use of reference level from policy targets in particular. Is there a risk in using targets that comes from policy, that these may be perhaps moved more from political aims rather than scientific evidence, and that they may change as perhaps political priorities change? And in case of such changes, how should the valuation reflect that, or rather not, if we want to maintain some consistency? Thank you.
There is another question for Ian, so maybe we can you can put these two questions together. And this one comes from Mandy Driver. I will read it right now. Mandy says, I think the ecosystem condition account as currently conceptualized in the SEA ecosystem accounts may actually substantially meet the needs of the inclusive ecosystem condition account you have proposed, especially the functionality and use dimensions. Also, I suspect you may be using the term reference level in a different way to the way it's used in the SEA EA. Your reference level could maybe be termed a desired level condition for a particular objective. Anyway, both these issues would be great to have a more detailed discussion about. And then there is also a comment from Vivek Apal that says, we seldom reflect on that capital in the SNA is defined as something owned by someone and possible to earn money from. Ecosystems that are being degraded are typically not owned by someone making money out of them. That means that to protect them, there will be need to be some rules of law. And then with the SEA, it is possible to show how much money is being spent on environmental management, and for policymakers to be able to put their cost into budgets or into a context of how it fits in a general budget. So this is more a comment rather than a question. And then there is another question for Ian. So we have three. How can a normative framework like the SEA describing what is be effectively reconciled with target-based approaches that define what should be, given the letter's potential for shifts in policy targets, for example, climate change targets since the Kyoto Protocol? And this is from Conrad van Landegem. Maybe we can stop here and then...
okay, so Jan, you have to answer really quickly. Ian?
No,
No.
I can read it now that Ian provided an answer on in the chat. So the answer to Mandy is yes, we acknowledge that the condition account is inclusive in the SEA in the paper. And if monetary values are to be used, it may be better to focus on inclusive monetary values as well. Our proposal both ensures condition indicators actually reflect what managers care about and what we collectively agreed we should act for. So it is resolutely target based on desired level condition and proposes evaluation approach that captures a broader range of concerns. And then there is also an answer to Conrad that says, I would say the role of the SEA describing what is could be reconciled with target-based approaches considering what the society says should be managed as determined by institutionalized goals, also as a matter of facts. Then shifts in policy targets, for example, climate change targets since the Kyoto Protocol, are tantamount to change of prices due to shifts in the individual preferences. We discuss in the paper how a change of an ecological debt could be decomposed and interpreted. This is one strategy of answer. Would the ecological debt be a satellite account within the statistical framework? And I admit it may be far from the current endeavor. Another, less disruptive reconciliation could be at least to ensure that condition indicator at least cover all dimensions of interest, arguably less volatile than target levels, meaning ecosystem services for the use rationale, but also features related to other management rationale, and leave it to the offices outside the official statistic, the role of assessing an ecological debt. But who would do it, with which accuracy and comparability? In any case, would we be willing to ensure policy outreach? Some level of hybridization would be required. What is most important is not to pretend to be value neutral. It is never the case, but to make explicit the values involved in the choice that are made for defining the system. For example, restricting monetary valuation to some ecosystem services. And then there is also an answer, yes, from Ian to Viveka. I am afraid I won't have the time to answer a comment, so I will focus on one important reflection I draw from Van Oli 2017, following your reflection on the definition of capital in the SNA. We may be biased trying to shape the monitoring of nature in the SEA with the logics of how we monitor the economy in the SNA. Would we think more directly about how to organize the monitoring of ecosystems as we did for the economy after World War II? What we need to manage collectively? What reliable information do we need for this? We may end up with a specific system which would then have to be articulated to the SNA. The SEA does this, and the ecological debt proposal also goes in this direction.
Yeah, I think we give the floor to the question on the room, in the room, and then we pass to the other. Okay.
Aldo Ravazzi, Italian Ministry of Environment, Chair of the OECD Committee on Green and Sustainable Finance. Many thanks to all the speakers to share with us the advancement of research in this area, because this is very useful to both policymakers and business community, I think. And we had a lot of discussions in the past with Femia and Capriolo, and they think to have very different opinions than from more traditional economists like me or Faiella from Bank of Italy that you mentioned. But I think we tend to agree on most of the things, and you have advanced in your research very much when you talk about the substitutability of many parts of nature, which is not realistic and possible. When you talk about the distinction between prices and values, this is a key element in analysis, I think. When we talk about the distinction between nature contributing to production and nature not contributing to production, but deserving safeguard and protection. I would not overestimate the target of giving a price, a market price to things. I don't think this is the dominating trend among statisticians and economists. It is a danger, but you are showing us the way, so it's very good. But as statistician and economist, I think we need to be able to communicate, as you say, with policymakers and business community. So if we are able to say how much GDP we lose when an ecosystem service decreases or disappears, when the level of biodiversity decreases or a species disappears, classical example, the bee service, this is very useful in communicating. It's also a question of language. That's why I continue to keep natural capital as much better than natural patrimony. You remember our old discussion on this. Still, ecosystems being degraded by overuse, as you write in your presentation, may get higher economic value. This doesn't surprise me. I think it may help and go in the right direction. Monetary values do not replace physical values. They must go together. Monetary values giving a value to things, not necessarily a price, can help to communicate if you're able to estimate the total value of natural capital, of natural income, making the distinction between capital and income, which is also underlined by you, is absolutely important. By the way, I often use this measurement which is proposed of what is the value of a ton of CO2 equivalent. I mean, up to the ETS, European ETS in the first phase, it was about €7. Now, only now in the recent years, it goes up to about €70. But the Swedish carbon tax talks about €170. And if we look at the old excise taxes, it is estimated implicitly in €300-400. If we go to IMF, they suggest that we need €700-800 per ton if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement targets and so on. So it's very important, the analysis which we are preparing, and we must keep in mind, I think, that we have to communicate to policymakers and business communities in ways that potentially they can understand, because obviously when they hear capital, they try to listen. Nature, they don't understand very much, but on capital, we have some possibility of influence. Thank you.
Aldo or Alessio?
No, I didn't get if there was a question. It was just your reflections.
Okay, so thank you very much. Yeah.
I would like to add 2 words. Thank you, Aldo, for acknowledging that what we're trying to do, that is give a contribution in that direction. We never said you don't have to talk money to the bankers or ministers of the economy. If you want to talk to them, you have to talk about the risks of losing everything through the loss of nature. And we think the right way to do this, the most convenient from a communication point of view, but also the only one that is coherent with the principles of official statistics, is to call things what they are. A cost is a cost, is a cost. It is not, or a foreseeable cost is something projected on the basis of models. You have to communicate it in the right way. And this is a task for official statistics. More in general, I would go back to Eric's presentation. He said there is a, what's it called? It's on the tip of my tongue. A problem of dominance in the realm of values. That is the dialectic between those who want to promote intrinsic values per se and those who think economic values are the reflection and it is an open issue and it is not for us statisticians to solve. What's it called? Oh, sorry. Pardon? Hegemony. Homogeneity came to my mind. It's a hegemony problem. So it's an hegemony problem. And philosophically, I must say, I'm quoting Einstein, I think, when I say you never solve the problem by using the same mindset that caused it. Thank you.
And Aldo, let me thank you for your reflections. And I will just add that your wish to think about on how to include these values in a macroeconomic analysis also goes in this direction. It's important to distinguish the different economic components of cost and of potential benefits because they need to be differently modeled, even in a macroeconomic model. So it's important to follow this framework, even if we want to make a macro analysis.
Thank you, Alessio. I think we can close here the discussion and pass to the last two presentations. So I give the floor to Ryan Grobler from Statistics South Africa that will share with us South Africa's journey to develop the first experimental biodiversity economy satellite